Good morning, RG.
Good morning. Is that Leslie?
It is.
All right. Well, hello everyone, and I'm RG Earnest with the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic of Legal Aid of Arkansas, and welcome to our October Facebook Live meeting. Today, I'm going to be presenting with Leslie McLean, who's with the DNA People's Legal Services. And I will let Leslie introduce herself here in a moment. But today we're going to be talking about what what you can do and should not do sometimes whenever you owe the IRS money. And so we're going to start out with just how collection actions begin. And from there, we're going to talk some about what the IRS's rights are with respect to collecting, but also we're going to talk about what your rights are as a taxpayer when it comes to collecting. And so, with that, I'm going to hand this over to Leslie to start our presentation.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, RG. I'm Leslie McLean, and I am the LITC clinic director for DNA People's Legal Services, and we cover areas in northern Arizona, parts of New Mexico, and Utah, primarily on the Navajo reservation, and also some other reservations. So yeah, we're going to talk about collections because there's really nothing worse than opening up that envelope and seeing that the IRS wants you to pay them money. So thank you for having me here on this program. And let's start with how IRS collections begin. Maybe the next there. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, all right. So how IRS collections begin. So you could be preparing your tax return, and then unfortunately, the bottom line shows that instead of getting a nice big refund, you owe the IRS money. That's one way that collection action begins. So if you don't pay the amount that you owe, the IRS will send you a notice saying that you under withheld and you owe this amount of money, or just that you owe this amount of money. So that then you're going to have some options, because the IRS is going to take some collection action moving forward. And in the last couple of years, the IRS's collection actions were pretty much put on hold, right, during COVID. So people weren't getting a lot of collection notices. And we're seeing in our clinic, I don't know about you, RG, but we're seeing in our clinic that collection notices are picking up again. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So the IRS is out there and they're beginning to collect, and you have some options when you get this collection notice. The first thing to know is that, if you have tax due on your tax return, it's usually because you under withheld. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but that's a really important step to avoiding collection from the IRS, is to make sure you're having enough money withheld. If you're a W-2 taxpayer, if you get a W-2, or even if you're a 1099, if you do gig work, or you work for a company, you can have taxes withheld from that money that you earn. And that's a lot better option than in April trying to figure out how you're going to pay the IRS. So you'll get a CP 2000 notice that alerts you that that alerts you that collection you're being collected on. The mismatch between what is shown on the return and what has been reported to the IRS, that's another way that you could owe money. So you filed your tax return, but you forgot to report a 1099, miscellaneous income. Maybe you did a little work, maybe you drove for Uber or something like that, and you forgot to put that on your tax return. the IRS does get notice that you have, earned that income and someone has reported it. So if you didn't report it on your tax return, the IRS is going to adjust your tax return and try and collect the difference. And finally, if your tax return is not filed, right? I think we have a question in the chat. I'll get to that in a second. But if you didn't file your tax return, but the IRS got W-2 information or 1099 information or Social Security, or retirement information that you had this income, they're going to do what's called a substitute for return, and they will basically file do your tax return and say you owe this amount of money to us. I don't know. I've never seen the IRS do an SFR if they owe you money. Have you? That's interesting. If you owe them money, they'll do the SFR and try and collect. But I've not. It's a substitute. An SFR is a substitute for return. It means you didn't file your return, but the IRS knows you had income. So they're going to file your return, and unfortunately, they're going to make some assumptions that might not be right. So they're going to assume usually that you're single, right? And they're going to assume that you don't have any dependents, even if you could have, claimed dependents. And they're going to assume that you don't qualify for any of the tax credits. And that's how they're going to file your return. So that is not something you want the IRS to do for you generally. Sometimes that might all be true. You might be single and you might not have any dependents, and what they have filed might be correct. And they're going to file that. They're going to do a substitute for return, and then they're going to try and collect any tax due. RG, have you seen in your clinic folks who have had an SFR filed and then the IRS sends them a refund?
No, I have not seen that. The only time I've ever seen the substitute for return is whenever the IRS believes that you owe them money, not the other way around.
Yeah, same here. And then another question I see in the chat is, do I get a collection notice if I send in the amount due with the return? Well, that depends, So sometimes you'll still get a collection notice because you could get a penalty for underpayment, right? Or it just depends when you filed your return. If you were late filing your return, you could get a penalty for that, or the IRS could be charging you interest. So even though you have an amount due on the return, generally speaking, interest and penalty are not going to get calculated at that point. So the IRS will send you a collection notice for that. But if you've paid it in time and you didn't, and you had, and there's some facts that have to be in place regarding whether or not you will get a penalty and interest charge when you're late paying or when you haven't had enough withheld. Okay, next slide. What the IRS can do. So there you have it. The IRS can charge you penalties and interest for late filing, late payment, underpayment, not having enough withheld. The IRS can put liens and levies and wage garnishments. I was just talking to someone about this. I have not seen a wage garnishment recently. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing any wage garnishments?
I think we see him occasionally.
Yeah. I'll just think I have a case now where we're trying to do an installment agreement for the taxpayer so that they can pay. They under withheld for years and years and years. And they have a large amount that they owe, and they are a wage earner. I mean, they get a W-2, and the IRS could know where they're getting their money, and they have not garnished this person's, fingers crossed, they haven't garnished. And I haven't seen any wage garnishment since I've been back doing this, which has been, maybe a year and a half now. Liens and levies we've seen the notice that the IRS is going to lien or levy, but they, I've not had a client come in and say the IRS took money from my bank account. again, I don't, I don't know if it's just so difficult for them to figure out, or our clients often are unbanked or have low amounts of money in their bank account. It wouldn't be worth it for the IRS to go in and try and take that. The IRS cannot act immediately. That's right. They have to give you notice that, a lien or levy is being put in place, and you have the opportunity to dispute it, right? You have many different ways that you can say, no, I disagree with this. Or you can try and enter into some other payment arrangement so the IRS isn't going to try and take what they can. The other thing I haven't seen also is I haven't seen Social Security being garnished. What are you seeing recently? I have not seen Social Security being garnished.
I haven't either, and that it's come up in our clinic because we've had a number of people who have who are on Social Security and are worried about garnishment of Social Security, but we haven't seen it. Now, one thing that we do see here in Arkansas, and I think someone noted this in the chat, is that the state of Arkansas does tend to be more aggressive than the IRS when it comes to wage garnishment.
That's for state taxes owed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Arizona is not, well, we won't get into that because, our clients are Native American, and Native Americans who live and work on their own reservation aren't subject to state tax in Arizona. So the majority of our clients are not subject to state tax unless they go and work somewhere else off the reservation. So we're not seeing the state of Arizona garnishing or putting liens or levies in place here. So I guess we're lucky in that sense. And I had an interesting thing happen, trying to get some folks on currently not collectible. I had them. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I had them fill out all the financial information, and I call the IRS, and I'm ready to do battle. And the IRS said, "Is there only income, Social Security?" And it was, but it wasn't just SSI. It was Social Security retirement that they had. And the IRS said, we'll just put them on currently not collectible if their only income is Social Security, which I know that seemed a little bizarre to me. I was happy to accept that, of course, that outcome. And I've had that happen twice where I've been ready to prove that they're not collectible, but the whoever I've talked to, it has been collections, has said, if their only income is Social Security, we'll put them on currently not collectible. So yeah, and I see that you are seeing the garnishment of the Social Security, but I'm not seeing that yet.
There is
All
a
right.
question out there I noticed, Leslie, about if someone asked about filing late returns if they haven't filed their returns in quite some time. What do you recommend?
Well, I recommend that they file their returns.
Right, yeah.
Here's what we do. We take that, so that before we take any action on collections, we want to see the whole picture. So we go in and get transcripts. I want to see what the account transcript says. I want to see what the income and wage transcript says. And then we'll prepare the returns, to figure out what their total debt might be, or if they're going to get refunds, if they still can get the refunds, because of, there's a 3-year, from the filing date where you can get refunds. Although we've been fortunate in getting the IRS, even if the refund is later than 3 years, but if they have debt in some of those years, the IRS has been willing to offset some of the debt with refunds that are beyond the statute of limitations for claiming refunds. So we just figure out what the picture is. What does it look like? And of course, there's a 10-year statute of limitation on collections, but that's only if you've filed your return or if the IRS has done a substitute for return. So I think it makes sense to get them filed, because with collections, a lot of times we've gone in and seen that the statute of limitation on collections has passed, and so folks don't really owe what they think they owe. They come in with old notices, but then we see that, we pull the transcripts and we see that the IRS has written off the debt after the 10 years. So yeah, I highly recommend that folks file their return. And if you want to get in any kind of a payment agreement or an offer in compromise, you have to have filed your returns.
Well, I'm gonna, and thank you for that. I think that discussion, Leslie, really helps to dovetail in with where we're going next, which is what your rights are as a taxpayer when it comes to IRS collection activities. And so you'll see in this next slide, you do have some rights. And many years ago, Congress passed a law called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights in response to what it saw as some abusive IRS tactics. And some of the rights in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights expressly relate to what about IRS collection actions. And those rights include the right to be informed, the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax, the right to challenge IRS decisions and be heard before the IRS, and the right to finality and appeal. And it's these rights are it's one of the reasons why it's especially important that you look at the letters that you receive from the IRS, because those letters are not just letters from the government dunning you for money. Those letters are also, as required by law, those letters are informing you of what your rights are. And so they're telling you, first off, how much you owe or how much the IRS thinks you owe, and how to challenge that or how to appeal. They're telling you why they think you owe it, and all of those pieces of information are very important to making sure that the IRS is following its own rules, and that as the taxpayer how to handle these situations. And so what can you do? Knowing that you have these rights, how specifically can you use them? And the worst alternative is that you can do nothing. And the only thing that you get when you do nothing is, if you even want to look at it this way, is really just a little bit of time before the IRS escalates its collection actions against you. And by doing nothing, you lose out a lot of times on some of your rights. Sometimes you lose out on a right to a hearing before an IRS hearing officer. And it is, I think, easy for taxpayers to do nothing. It's awfully intimidating to get the letters from the IRS because they do pile up. The IRS looks at people's tax issues on a tax year by tax year basis. So if you owe taxes for more than one tax year, you're going to see multiple letters, not just one. And also, if you owe jointly with your spouse is going to be getting the same letters. And so, next thing you know, you can be looking at a pile of IRS letters, and it can be awfully intimidating. The better alternative is to open those letters because, like I said in the previous slide, those letters are going to inform you of what some of your rights are. And so open them, read them, understand what your possibilities are for how to respond, how to appeal, how much time you have to appeal. Make sure you save these letters, but also make sure that you think these letters are correct, or that the amount that the IRS says that you owe is correct. Sometimes there can be misreporting about how much income you've received, and the IRS may have different numbers than what you have, and your numbers may be accurate. And so you want to make sure that you read your letters to see if you can challenge these things and before it's too late to challenge them. And I think
Yeah, no, RG, I'll just make a point here about, if the IRS has income information, like they have a 1099 that you didn't report on your tax return, right? Again, they're just going to assume. So let's say you were a gig worker. We have a lot of medical transport drivers on the reservation. So let's just say that you did have that income. They're going to assume you didn't have any related expenses. So what legal aid or one of the low income taxpayer clinics can help you with, is, amending that return, or, showing the IRS that, no, I don't owe this much money. I owe less because I had expenses. So again, the IRS is going to make the worst assumptions for you, when they're adding in that extra income that you didn't report on your return. Sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you, Leslie, and that's really good. I noticed there's a couple questions here in the feed. One of them is, can legal aid help me with challenging a notice? And yes, absolutely. And I think Leslie, you're actually the next slide that you're going to be talking about are ways to appeal. And so yeah, I think that specifically these ways to appeal that I think you're going to talk about are all ways that um, low-income taxpayer clinics can help their taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing you'll want to do is find a low income taxpayer clinic, see if you're eligible for help, and get the help. Responding to these notices all have timelines on them. That's a really important thing to remember. Like the IRS will, on a CP 2000 notice, I think it's 30 days, but I could be wrong. You need to respond in 30 days, or we'll just assume that, that you owe this amount of money. The thing with that notice is you can get an extension from the IRS for responding. So if you go into a clinic, they can help you get the extension. But responding to a notice of deficiency, there is a 90-day timeline that you need to petition the tax court if you disagree with the proposed changes that the IRS is wanting to make. So the IRS will send you this. It's clearly marked notice of deficiency. Unfortunately, in our clinic, we usually get these after the 90 days has expired, and that's too bad, because we cannot extend that deadline, right? It's statutory deadline. We like to believe we could extend it in certain circumstances, but we don't really have anything to back that. So the best thing to do is, if you get a notice of deficiency, and you go to a clinic, or even yourself, you can go online and file a petition in tax court. It's very straightforward, but it's better to have a clinic help you with that. And then, so that's one of the first things our central intake asks people when they're calling about a tax matter is, have you gotten a notice of deficiency, and what is the date on that notice? So we can make sure that we can help them respond. However, if it's too late, if they've missed that 90-day deadline, there are other options, right? There's collection due process, there's audit reconsideration. So there are other other avenues that the clinic can help you with to collect, responding to the collections.
Right. And also, Leslie, it seems like on these notices of deficiency, don't those typically come as in certified mail? Is that right?
They do. They absolutely do. I just had, yeah, and open them, right? I don't know what else to say,
Right.
It's scary, right? No one wants to open a certified letter from the IRS, but yeah, because the IRS has to prove, that in fact it was mailed on this day, and in fact this is the 90 days. It says right on the letter what the last day to file is. Over in the left-hand column on the first page, it will say, this is the day you have to file by. This is a deadline.
And it's clearly, I noticed one of the questions in the feed is if it says it's a notice of deficiency, and yes, it does. It will say that in the title of of the letter is notice of deficiency.
In bold, right? In
Yes.
bold letters, it will say notice of deficiency. Yes.
Yeah. Well, did you have anything more, Leslie, before we move
Now, let me
on
look in
to?
the chat again. I haven't been very good. What if my address has changed? So there is, gosh, it's not a, I don't know the form number. There is a form you can fill out. Your representative can fill it out for you, and get an address changed to the IRS. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you can't argue that I moved and I didn't get the notice of deficiency, because it's your responsibility to get your address changed to the IRS. The IRS will mail it to the last known address that they have for you. And that's usually the last address you used on your tax return. We've seen a problem this year with our clients going to tax preparers and the tax preparer using the wrong address. I don't know why. All of our clients have PO boxes. Most of our clients have PO boxes. We don't get mail delivered on the reservation. But we've seen some preparers using a physical address of like 1.5 miles northeast of the chapter house. That's never getting to our clients. And so we've had to go in and do a change of address. So if your address changes, you need to let the IRS know as soon as possible. And they will just use the address that you used on your last tax return.
Right. Okay, well, let's move on to some of these payment alternatives. And I think what I'll do, or what we'll do, is I'll talk about the first two, and if you're okay with it, you can talk about the next two.
Sure.
So the first payment alternative is an extension of time to pay. And it sometimes it can be that easy with the IRS, is that, and to avoid more IRS collection action, or more invasive IRS collection action, is to just call the IRS and ask for some more time to pay the amount. And it's kind of more of an informal process, but it does stop any sort of other collection action. The IRS will go up to 180 days to do this kind of arrangement. You will still owe some amount of interest, and sometimes you will still owe penalties, but you do not have to pay a fee usually to extend the time to pay if it's for a short enough period. The other alternative is to enter into what it's called a formal installment agreement. And if you do that, there is oftentimes, or usually, a fee for entering into the installment agreement, but it does allow you to pay off your IRS debt over a number of months at a time, sometimes even years at a time. And again, like the extension of time to pay, it doesn't mean that you can avoid interest, or if you owe penalties, it's not going to, for the installment agreement itself does not forgive the penalties, but it does give you a way as the taxpayer to manage the amount that you owe, and to pay back the IRS on your terms, or on terms that are more comfortable for you. And so that is the advantage of doing the installment agreement. And so, Leslie, I'll let you talk about offers in compromise, and also currently not collectible status.
Yeah, sure. So this is where it's important for us to look at, what what years we're looking at, what kind of debt we're looking at, and whether it makes more sense to go into currently not collectible, which is, in my mind, always sort of a temporary thing, because the IRS can determine that you are collectible again. So it's not all that difficult to get into currently not collectible if you really can't afford to pay the debt. You're not making, your income, your expenses are more than your income. You just have to prove that. So currently not collectible is an easier path than offering compromise, but offering compromise gets the debt, gone, really, right? So let's say you just have a lot of IRS debt, and it's unlikely that the IRS will ever be able to collect it from you. We can work on putting together an offer and compromise. They take a long time for the IRS to process. I'm thinking 9 months right now, but that might just be optimistic from what I'm hearing. And often they're denied. So if the IRS determines that they think you can pay during your lifetime the debt, they won't accept your offer and compromise. But sometimes, if it's just clear that there's doubt as to collectability, that's one way we get an offer and compromise through. Then the IRS might say, okay, we'll take your offer, and even very small amounts they'll take to write off a whole lot of tax debt. But it just depends, and it's a long process. I mean, because you have to provide all your financial information, and the IRS is going to check all that. Whereas currently not collectible, again, it's a little easier to get you on that. But with currently not collectible, the IRS, anytime they see, let's just say you get, for some reason you come into a large amount of money and the IRS sees that, they're gonna consider you collectible again, and they're gonna change that switch on your account and try and collect. And I see in the chat we have this great question about, on TV they say they can settle my IRS debt for pennies. That's not true. They're just going to take your money, and they're not going to get any settlement at all on your debt. It's just predatory collections. So go to a low-income taxpayer clinic, go to legal aid. Even if a legal aid near you doesn't have a low-income taxpayer clinic, they'll hook you up with someone who does. Have we had offers accepted for small amounts? Sure, but that's, those are far and few between. Usually you just have to come up with a way to pay the IRS something to get rid of the debt. I wouldn't go to any of those folks who say they can help you get rid of your IRS debt. I've not seen anyone have a good outcome with that. Instead, they've just paid a lot of money and gotten nothing in return.
Right. Yeah, well, I think we can move on to our next slide here. I know that we're pushing up on our 30 minutes, but that's most of it. Oh wait, I think there is a question in the chat about bankruptcy and that as an alternative. And yes, the answer to the bankruptcy question is sometimes there are certain types of taxes, income taxes being one of them, that can be discharged in bankruptcy, but it's a pretty complicated set of rules. And so that's, like Leslie said, it's a good reason to get in touch with an LITC. And the other thing I'll add, if you want to avoid tax problems in the future, file your returns on time. Make sure you withhold, or your employer is withholding. Make sure that you're paying estimated taxes, and seek out the help of a VITA center. These are called volunteer income tax clinics that you can go to, and they will can help prepare your tax returns for free. Leslie, do you guys have VITA clinics near where you're at that are easily available to your taxpayers?
Well, so on the Navajo Reservation, there are 2 VITA sites, much fewer than we really need. We were just down with the Supai tribe at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and they actually have folks who come down there and do VITAs. So we have some, but not enough. We're working on getting more VITA sites. And what's great about the VITA sites is, we, as you do too, I'm sure, you build relationships, and then they know that if someone comes to the VITA site and says, oh, I want to file my return, but I'm afraid the IRS is going to take my refund, they can, help you get, in touch with an LITC. So,
Right.
yeah, so DNA, we have one Vitus site that our staff volunteers for, but United Way also has another Vitus site on the reservation, but we could use about 10 more, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're kind of in a similar situation in the more rural part of Arkansas that I'm in. Is we have one in the area that I'm at, but we could use more.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's direct file now too. So folks who are computer savvy maybe can use that. I know it's still being, the kinks are still being worked out of that, but for some folks in some states, is Arkansas doing direct file?
I don't know that we have signed that Arkansas has signed on yet. I had checked about there's someone in the chat knows more than I do here. They're saying no, and I think that's right because I'd been checking. I checked about a couple weeks ago, and the answer was still no about a couple weeks to a month ago. So
We did the pilot. Arizona was one of the pilot states last year,
yeah,
so we do have it. That's fortunate.
right. Well, thank you, Leslie, and
Thank you.
that's pretty much our presentation. On here at the end, we've got your contact information at DNA People's Legal Services and mine as well at Legal Aid of Arkansas. You can also call the tax helpline. And for Legal Aid of Arkansas LITC, tune in for our next Facebook Live. That will be on Monday, November 18th at also at noon. And
Thank you.
that
Thank you,
is,
Archie. This was fun.
oh, thank you. I had fun too, Leslie.
All right.
Goodbye.